From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's what's ahead. We'll welcome in K-State's Chuck Rice and Carlos Pires to talk about the principles of improving crop soil health. That'll be the central theme of a K-State Soil Health Field Day coming up next week in central Kansas. Also standing by, K-State's Rodrigo Onofre, reporting on corn and soybean crop diseases turning up in Kansas of late, including stalk rot development in corn stands, which could influence harvest timing decisions, and symptoms in soybeans that may look like sudden death syndrome, but instead, says Rodrigo, are being caused by an insect. And awaiting with another Stop, Look, and Listen, K-State's Gus Vander Hoeven. All that and more right here on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to the midweek edition of Agriculture Today, and as always, glad to have you along. Well, the term soil health may mean different things to different producers, but it is of a common interest amongst many agricultural producers in the state, and it will be the theme of a special field day co-sponsored by K-State coming up a week from tomorrow, the 2nd of September. A couple of those individuals involved in this field day and most assuredly in the area of soil health research are with us now from the K-State Department of Agronomy. Chuck Rice, soil scientist, and Carlos Pires, who is a graduate researcher in that department. Chuck, how do you codify the term soil health in your own mind as we talk about it here?
Eric, the soil health, the ultimate goal is to have soils that are healthy in order to support productivity, and it's really climate resiliency, is that those soils can withstand weather extremes, whether it's drought or too much water. Mm-hmm. I have affectionately termed the properties of soil health as being my holy trinity. And that's, And so what are the three parts? And so the three-legged stool or the trinity is really soil carbon. And the reason soil carbon is so important is that it's the food for the soil microbes, but also has some impact on the structure of the soil. The second leg would be then, microbial activity, composition, because that's what drives the nutrient cycling, makes nutrients available for plants, and is important also to help build soil structure. And that leads into the third leg, which is soil structure. What we do in our lab is measure aggregate stability, and we've seen a strong relationship. The amount of carbon, you have more aggregates. Also, the microbes help build aggregates. And that structure is also important because then you have air and water movement out of the soil. So when we have these intense rainstorm events, more of it's going to infiltrate into the soil and then be more resilient during those dry periods, and also protects against erosion, both wind and water erosion. So that's what we're looking at. Carlos is doing the research, is looking at that relationship and trying to track how those measures, soil health, but those three properties change with time on producer fields.
Let's bring Carlos in and talk of his research to the moment in this area, the determinants of those three elements and how those can be managed. Talk about your studies, if you would.
Okay, well, our research is consistently a on-farm research. I think that's the first point we had to mention. And this is because we don't work in small plots. We work with real life. It's on-farm studies. We work with 20, 30, 40 acres and strip trials and across Kansas. In the books, soil health is a beautiful thing. But when you go to the field, that's a little bit different. And that's the challenge we are trying to overcome with this work. And we are testing different management practices across Kansas, working with cover crops, working with nutrient management. And what we have been seeing is that these cover crops, even though it's only 3 years right now in these 4 sites we have in Kansas, we are start to see some differences. And these few days we use to spread the word and show farmers and the ag community what our findings are.
Which we'll fill folks in on as far as the details of this field day coming up. But Chuck, cover crops seem to be the anchor around a great lot of soil health work. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's one of the key ingredients. They were looking at change in practices that would benefit soil health. So the first one is less disturbance, so going from till to no-till. And then the next step would be going to no-till and then the addition of cover crops. And then you see some additional benefits of that. And then one of the farmers that we're working with, Doug Palin, has been no-tilling and cover crops for over 20, 25 years. And so his organic matter carbon levels are at a high level. And so now we're looking at taking advantage of that improved soil health, organic matter, and managing its nutrients to be more efficient. But yeah, cover crops is kind of in middle step, and so each layer you're adding complexity by improving soil health and ultimately sustained productivity.
If one has been on this path for a while, as you suggest right there with that example, Chuck, how can they know what the best route would be for maintaining and continuing to improve that soil health through management?
Well, when no-till started, people say, okay, I'm going to plant without tillage. Well, the whole system changes, right? You got to change your weed management, your fertility program. And so that's what we've seen as you advance farther in improving the soil health. Then you take advantage of that system, but it's looking at, I got different weeds showing up. I need to do rotations. One of the problems we have with herbicide-resistant weeds is that we've had a very simple rotation, use the same herbicide. But looking at more complex rotations, wheat, corn, soybeans, or milo, putting that in there, and then rotate your herbicides as well as rotate your crops is really key. And then you got to change your fertility program, your phosphorus, nitrogen management. I think Dorvar Ruiz-Diaz talked about phosphorus stratification. So you got to think about all those things. And so what we do in the research side is think of, okay, we're looking at this one simple piece, or maybe it's not so simple, but then a farmer has to put the whole system together. And that's what the advantage of Carlos's research is on farm. It's working with the system and not one particular piece. And then having those field days to demonstrate, as Carlos said, in the real world, that how that system works.
More about the field day very shortly here. But Carlos, just to what Chuck said, upon your interactions with producers through your research, how does one start figuring out what works for them in this or that location? What should they key off of in terms of what's happening on the land and what should be?
Well, that's a great question, and I can just bring one example that happened 2 weeks ago. One of the farmers contacted me, and the soybeans there were different in the cover crop strips and the no cover crop strips. And we were seeing something there that we were not seeing in eastern Kansas, for example. So it's totally different. We have different rain amounts in eastern Kansas compared to central Kansas. So there's not a cake recipe. It's totally different. So each place, each farmer has his own system, and we have to work to make that system work with our treatments.
But they need to understand, those producers, the fundamentals of what's going on out there. That's where it starts.
Exactly. And here the field day comes, because we were going to talk about the principles of soil health. So Dr. Rice will talk about the principles of soil health, and Dr. Ignacio Ciampidi will talk about cropping system, how to intensify that. And we also will have Dr. Dorvar Ruiz-Diaz talking about soil fertility for healthy soils, and I'll work a little bit on some demonstrations for farmers so they can really see roots of cover crops. They can see how the aggregates are stable or not with water and things like that.
Now, this field day will be taking place, as we get to the specifics of that, a week from tomorrow in Saline County on Knopf Farms near Gypsum. Chuck, one thing we do want to squeeze in here, though, and that is where carbon markets fit into this equation. And that will be part of this program, as a matter of fact.
Yes. So I mentioned carbon is one of the key ingredients for the soil health trinity. But in addition to soil health, there's a lot of interest in carbon markets. And I've been working on this for, about 20 years, I think, carbon markets. It was a hot topic in the early 2000s, kind of went away, and now it's come back. What I'm going to talk about is some of the principles of carbon markets, what to be cautious about, what's the reality and the promises some of these carbon markets and the potential.
And my favorite part, and I'm excited for that, is the farmers panel. So we will have a farmers panel with different farmers.
Yeah.
Well, the farmers that we work with across Kansas, so one from eastern part of the state, north, south central. So we will have them there to discuss. And if you are a farmer, feel free to make questions, and they will try to answer about how they use soil health for their own operation.
Very important to learn from one's peers. So that'll be a
Exactly.
featured part of this special field day on soil health. It'll take place near Gypsum along Kip Road, Knopf Farms there in Saline County. Chuck, when does it get going, and what do people need to know?
Yeah, so we'll start off at 4 o'clock, and it'll last for about a couple hours or so. And then Kansas Corn will be providing dinner. No cost for the dinner, but you do need to register. You can go to kansascorn.com/tour, and then they can go ahead and register. Again, there's no cost. It's just they need to get an account. If you want to eat and eat well, we need an account for that.
Excellent opportunity, producers. Again, K-State, the Department of Agronomy, and Kansas Corn co-sponsoring this Soil Health Field Day. It is set for a week from tomorrow, September the 2nd, from 4 until 6:30. Once more, the location, Knopf Farms near Gypsum. To register for the meal count, go to this address, kscorn.com/tour, and do so as soon as possible. And we wish the both of you the best as you conduct this important program, gentlemen. Thank you for coming over.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you very much.
Along with us from the Department of Agronomy, Chuck Rice, soil scientist, and graduate researcher Carlos Pires. And they will be on board at that field day a week from tomorrow. Look into it at kscorn.com/tour. And we'll return with more on Agriculture Today. We're back now on Agriculture Today, and for you corn and soybean producers, an update on the disease threats that may or may not be in your stands as we're pushing toward that harvest time ever so gradually now. We're welcoming in Rodrigo Onofre. Rodrigo is a research and extension row crop disease specialist here at K-State. Let's start with something that was put out there a few weeks back about southern rust invading our corn stands in Kansas. Rodrigo, you have an update on that situation.
Well, Eric, thanks for having me here today. I really appreciate it. Yeah, starting with southern rust, we did report it quite early in the state this year. It was early June, early July. We found it here. We do have reports in, I think, about 18 counties, especially in the southeast up to Republic County, north central Kansas. Southern rust got here early. However, I haven't seen much fields where it took off with high levels and high pressure, which could be related with the dryness in certain areas and also the really high temperatures that we have had in the past weeks.
So that problem has faded. Yeah. Is that your take?
Yeah, I think southern rust at this point, the growth stage that we are right now, it's past that R3 and we're probably like R5, R6. So it's past that stage that where it would cause yield problems or fungicide would have still potential benefit for yield increase.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully we have that in the rear view mirror and that it did not inflict immense damage on our corn stands out there. However, you have an eye toward some potential problems, again, as harvest time approaches, ear rots possibly being one of those.
Yeah, so the ear rots and the stalk rots are two things that we need to keep an eye on now as we move forward, right? With the hot and dry conditions that we're seeing, those two diseases, they can be quite severe. And the stalk rots, the one way to evaluate and assess it in the field, it's as you walk by it, you check 100 plants. You can do that push test where you push a plant 30 degrees. And if that plant snaps, that might be caused by stalk rots. Another way, you can pinch that stalk and see if it's soft. It might be caused by stalk rot as well. At this point, there's nothing to do in terms of fungicides or anything else for those stalk rots. However, if you do find it quite severe in your field, an early harvest might help to avoid the lodging that those diseases can cause in your field. Especially if you're going to go through a high wind scenario, I would maybe harvest with a little bit more high moisture content. On the ear rots, the easiest way to do it is when you're walking by your field. You need to peel and check those ears to see if you see any mold or any rotten on those ears, right? There are a few of them, Diplodia, Aspergillus, and Fusarium, and those are the three main ones that we see here in Kansas. And if you're seeing high levels of those three ear rots, what you could also do is harvest maybe a little bit early as well with a little bit more moisture. However, you need to dry that moisture to below 15% so you can slow down that ear rot development. That would be a good strategy at this point.
One starts by inspecting their fields, though.
Exactly. You have to get out there and check what's going on for sure.
So those are a couple of conditions that could be problematic in corn in the latter stages of that production season. Growers be watching for those. But Rodrigo, turning to soybeans now, there is a whole host of other things that could be at work there.
Well, soybean, it's being relatively good here in Kansas. However, the main thing what's happening right now is the drought. I think soybean, it's feeling that, especially central and western part of the state. We're seeing some very low moisture conditions, which I think it's affecting the crop a little bit. In terms of disease, soybean is looking great. I'm seeing some frog eye leaf spot in central Kansas. Things that we need to be looking out right now as we move forward with soybeans, it's actually not a disease, but an insect, right? The Dectes stem borer, which will cause some leaf necrosis and yellow spots on the leaves that can be very related to certain disease, such as SDS. So if you think you're having some disease, I invite you to go out there and split that stem and check to see if you have that insect in your soybeans. But as I mentioned, moving forward, right, in the disease side now, we will probably be on the lookout for SDS, which is that sudden death syndrome, cause some yellowish discoloration and necrosis of the leaf, and can cause defoliation as well. Another one that we can be on the lookout for is charcoal rot, associated more with high temperatures and drought conditions as well, which is kind of what we're seeing for most part of the state.
Mm-hmm. One you didn't mention specifically, Phytophthora root rot. Is it out there as well, Rodrigo?
Yeah, well, Phytophthora was a big concern for us early on in the season when it was low temperatures and wet conditions. We did see quite a bit of Phytophthora. We received a few samples in the diagnostic lab, which it's always a good thing to work with your K-State extension agent. Whenever you have a problem, you can call them and it will help you to send a sample for us here in the diagnostic lab, and we'll get back to you soon. But Phytophthora, as I said, was a early season problem. And Eric, one thing that I keep bringing back, it's that we're still having the SCN, the soybean cyst nematode free testing program for our growers. So it's another thing to take advantage here in Kansas if you're here to check your fields and be ahead of the game and see what's the population levels, right? The best way to manage soybean cyst nematode is to start with a good monitoring program.
And that testing can happen roughly any time for a good, accurate count on the nematodes?
Yes, it can happen anytime. Now would be actually a very good time to, if you're seeing some areas in your field that it's looking irregular or stunted, or right at that entrance of the field or by the fence line, those are areas, or river bottom or lower areas where there's water accumulation, to check for the nematode.
And once more, that free testing offered through K-State. Inquire through your local extension office or get a hold of the plant pathology department at the university for more about that. Finally here, Rodrigo, thinking about late season fungicide applications, and if this summary is correct, corn, well, we're too far along in most cases. Soybeans, any windows of necessity there for late season treatment at all on any of these pathogens?
Yeah, I would say that they're walked together on that matter. I think we're past due our fungicides application for most of our corn and soybeans, just because that growth stage it's almost at that maturity level, and there will be not much benefit for yield potential, right, from those applications there.
Right. But knowing what's going on has value on down the road, correct?
Yeah, and for next season, we're actually having some very interesting trials in 2 locations, Eric, where we're looking at fungicide timing. We're comparing V10 application and tassel application. Several products, we're checking the majority of them to see how they're performing here in Kansas, and for our disease pressure. So we have good, at least at this point right now, there were quite enough disease, and we'll probably have good results to share with our growers.
Looking forward to seeing that data as it comes forth. Good to have new information on disease management in our row crops. And Rodrigo, you're extraordinarily busy this time of the year, so thank you for taking a few moments and talking with us on these matters today.
Well, thank you, Eric.
Rodrigo Onofre, he's a row crop disease specialist with K-State Research and Extension, with that roundup on diseases of interest in corn and soybeans in Kansas on this part of Agriculture Today. And just a quick mention here that the corn crop around the state is far enough along now that you growers can start calculating some reasonable estimates of the likely yield from a given stand. That from K-State crop production specialist Ignacio Ciampiti, who wrote up an article which outlines the easy calculations for coming up with that estimate.
When you look at the percentage of dry matter that we need to achieve to the end of the season, we're already feeling very comfortable that if we have any stress, heat, drought, or any impact factor affecting yields, we have less chances to see a large yield reduction. So in many of those scenarios, the yield reduction could be just less than 10%. Usually when we are getting to dent, less than 5%. So from this time on, any yield estimates that we tend to do, and depending on how uniform and how many areas of the field we do the estimates, they could be quite precise. And when you are looking at how is the best approach to do the estimate, there are sections of the field that they are with high variability, and there are some sections that they have very low variability. So when you think about taking a representative sample in the field, you need to make sure that you take equal number of samples to represent the entire field conditions.
K-State's Ignacio Ciampiti. Corn growers get a look at that article, Estimating Corn Yield Potential, in the Agronomy e-Update newsletter posted on July the 29th at agronomy.ksu.edu. We'll be back. This is Agriculture Today. Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Welcome back. And on we go now to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, yesterday, the USDA updated its Coronavirus Food Assistance Program 2 aid payments to release $1 billion in aid to include contract producers for poultry and livestock, including swine producers. The department set an October 12th deadline for producers to apply for CFAP 2 or modify existing aid applications. The department is restarting enrollment for the program that had begun at the end of the Trump administration, but was put on hold while the Biden administration re-examined the program. The USDA stated the appropriations bill provided up to $1 billion for payments to contract growers of livestock and poultry for lost revenue from January 1st through December the 27th of last year. Now, contract growers eligible would include those who raise chickens, turkeys, and other poultry, as well as hogs and pigs. Republican Senators Joni Ernst and Chuck Grassley from Iowa joined with Democrat Senators Amy Klobuchar and Tina Smith from Minnesota to write USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack back in August 9th, questioning what had happened to the aid for contract swine growers. Congress had authorized that aid in the Consolidated Appropriations Act passed last December. Former Secretary Sonny Perdue had announced aid for swine producers under CFAP 1 just before leaving office, those aid programs were then frozen and underwent that review by the Biden administration. The administrator for the Farm Service Agency, Zach Ducheneau, said that the agency listened to feedback from stakeholders about the gaps in pandemic assistance and made adjustments to make the program more equitable. Producers can submit that CFAP-2 application or modify an existing one at the local Farm Service Agency office. And the USDA has announced a proposed framework for a project that could help prevent future human pandemics stemming from diseases in animals. Here's a closer look from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
It seems incredible, but according to researchers,
up to 75% of emerging infectious diseases in humans come from animals.
Dr. Mike Watson with the Agriculture Department's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. He's part of a proposed project just announced this week to create basically an early warning system of possible human disease outbreaks by doing more animal disease surveillance.
To identify emerging diseases in animals, that we can alert our public health partners ahead of time that we're seeing this in animals, and we can hopefully start taking steps to prevent a huge outbreak in humans moving forward.
The plan first will focus on SARS-CoV-2. That's the virus in animals that causes COVID-19 in humans. But later on, the project would expand to other diseases. Watson says this is not just a USDA thing. It would involve sharing knowledge and working with many U.S. and global agencies on what he calls a One Health approach.
It's combining humans, animals, and the environment.
Initial funding made possible by the American Rescue Plan. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
2 companies are promoting carbon dioxide pipelines that would crisscross 6 states and combine to sink as much as 24 million metric tons of carbon emissions into geologic formations if they can convince landowners and others that the pipelines will help the local agricultural economy. The proposed pipeline projects reflect a new strategy in the way that ethanol plants can lower their overall carbon footprints. Farmers and landowners will be asked for right-of-way access that may financially benefit the ethanol plants where they sell their corn. The competing Midwest carbon pipelines were launched within weeks of each other, both with major financial backing and a separate collection of ethanol companies lined up as customers and partners. The pipelines would offer ethanol plants more favorable market access in low-carbon fuel markets, as well as the possibility of selling carbon offsets and federal tax credits for sinking carbon into the ground. The companies project that their ethanol plant customers can get to net zero emissions by the end of the decade. Ranchland Trust of Kansas, along with the Sand County Foundation and the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts, have announced 4 finalists for the Kansas Leopold Conservation Award. Scarlett Higgins tells us here that award recognizes the hard work and the dedication of landowners and their conservation efforts.
Given in honor of renowned conservationist Aldo Leopold, the $10,000 award recognizes those who inspire others with their dedication to land, water, and wildlife. Award finalist Vance and Louise Emke of Healy conserve soil and water by experimenting with crops to protect fields from soil erosion. Additionally, they have more than 50 playas that are used for research and education on how they impact the Ogallala Aquifer. Ray and Susan Flickner of Wichita installed subsurface drip irrigation technology to be more efficient with water and nutrient application on crops. They also experiment with cover crops to improve water infiltration and suppress weeds. Dwayne Roth of Manhattan owns Big D Farms in Finney County, where cover crops are used to build soil health and combat wind erosion. He tests irrigation strategies that maintain crop production with reduced water usage. Glenn and Barbara Walker of Brookville are improving soil, wildlife, and water distribution through rotational grazing and investments in removing invasive red cedar trees. The 2021 Kansas Leopold Award will be presented in November during the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts Convention held in Wichita. I'm Scarlett Higgins.
And a touch of bragging here, if you will. Kansas State University's College of Agriculture has again been recognized as a top 10 college by Niche.com in its annual Best Colleges for Agricultural Sciences ranking. Of the 142 agriculture colleges and programs that Niche.com compared for their 2021 list, K-State ranks number 7. The Niche.com ranking is based on an analysis of academic, admissions, financial, and student life data collected by the U.S. Department of Education, along with millions of reviews from students and alumni. The Niche.com list of top 10 agriculture schools reads as follows. Number 1, Cornell University. Number 2, Texas A&M University. In at number 3, the University of Georgia. Number 4, the University of Florida. Number 5, the University of California at Davis. In the 6th slot, North Carolina State University. Then K-State at number 7, Oklahoma State University at number 8. Number 9, Clemson University. And number 10, the University of Wisconsin. You're listening to Agriculture Today, reminding you to take full advantage of our podcast service. You can find out all about that, including the automatic download of each day's broadcast at agtoday.net. That's agtoday.net. This is the K-State Radio Network. This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
There is a new bridge. A beautiful modern bridge called the Crossing.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University.
With all the chaos in Afghanistan, the agony, fear and pain, I want to stop for a moment and reflect on 2 stories. I'm going back 77 years. In September 1944, the landings and following battle near Arnhem, the Netherlands. The movie, A Bridge Too Far, tells the story, as does the book, with the same title, written by Cornelius Ryan. A friend sent me this story in the Wichita Eagle by Karen Seidvogel. She wrote it for Stars and Stripes. It tells of the event in the battle. Through the forward-moving narrow corridor, all bridges were captured, except the very last one near Arnhem across the Rhine River. It was a push to enter Germany. They made it as far as Nijmegen and saved the bridges across the Waal River. At the roundabout approaching the old bridge, there is the bronze statue of the paratrooper with his parachute slowly collapsing behind him, all in bronze. But there is a new bridge, a beautiful modern bridge called the Oversteek, meaning the crossing, opened in 2013, and it runs over the spot where a group of paratroopers crossed the Waal River in canvas boats in 1944. That bridge, the crossing, pays homage to the 48 paratroopers who died in that operation. Hundreds of the 82nd Airborne Division paratroopers frantically paddled their canvas boats using their rifle butts to go faster. The smoke screen, which was supposed to hide the operation, lifted as an unexpected wind blew it away. They became sitting ducks. As I said, 48 died in that crossing. Today, that bridge is flanked by 48 pairs of light, 1 pair for each soldier who died. At dusk, when the lights go on, they go on slowly from the south to the north, same direction as the young soldiers rode frantically to make the crossing. And there's more. Ever since the bridge was opened at sunset, there is a silent walk across the bridge. Again, it starts on the south side, walking north. It's a silent walk. Sometimes there's only one, a veteran, designated to walk that evening. Other times, he or she is accompanied by visitors who have heard about the walk and the bridge and the story. There is a simple memorial at the end with the names of those 48 paratroopers who were killed, trying to get across. They were young men, 18, 19, 20 years old. On August 22nd this year, there was the 2,500th Sunset March or Walk. As they crossed, the pairs of light slowly came on, pair after pair. Thank you. The other story I happened to come across as a newspaper clipping out of the Manhattan Mercury in May 14, 1980. It is titled, "Spring Days Remind Him of Another May." It's written by James I., who was assigned to the 452nd Heavy Bomber Group. He flew at the end of the war to drop food over western part of the Netherlands, Amsterdam, Utrecht, Rotterdam, parts of the country which were still occupied and people were starving. There was no food in the cities. I remember looking up at the tiny planes with long vapor trails, formation after formation, the sun shining on the fuselage. A truce was arranged, and there was an order to modify the heavy bombers so they could carry tons of food to be dropped from 300 feet on a bomb-scarred airstrip. It would be a free fall drop. What strikes me of this recollection is the honesty of the expressed fears by the crews to come in so low with so many planes without any way or form to be able to defend themselves. It's no wonder that pilots and crews were anxious. When the Flying Fortress, a B-17, took off and settled in position in the formation, they headed east across the North Sea coming from England. There was to be radio silence. Approaching the Dutch coast, they were so low that they could see the rolls of barbed wire strung out along the beaches. They could see the German soldiers patrolling. They started to relax as they flew over the German anti-aircraft guns, but no shots were fired. Suddenly, they could laugh. As they flew on, they passed over fields of tulip blooms, all blooming. As they lumbered along and were approaching the drop zone, they saw where Dutch growers had yanked flowers off the tulips in a huge field, and it's plainly spelled as read from the air, but not seen from the ground, "Thanks, Yanks." The planes roared on and dropped their cargo, thousands of sea rations. The cheers of the people on the ground could be heard. As the planes thundered low over the city of Amsterdam, they saw German soldiers on foot, some on tanks and other war vehicles. People stood on roofs waving. The planes turned northward across the Southern Sea, now reclaimed and made into farmland, then back across the North Sea to their base in Eastern Anglia, England. Another mission completed, but what a mission. Soon the war will be over, but more people had to die. Then Germany surrendered and people slowly picked up the pieces. When I came to Kansas in April 1974, I met with people who had flown those food missions. I thanked them.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University. Thanks for listening in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.